The Ransom of Mercy Carter, Chapters 10 and 11. Chapter 10. Kahnawake, November 1704. Temperature 44 degrees. Mr. Williams's second visit occurred in the morning before the celebration for Flying Legs. Again he came with soldiers, stood on the jetty, and begged to see Eunice. Again the Indian said Ayangat was with her mother. Mr. Williams argued. Huld's son listened politely. Ruth stormed up, and Mercy edged closer, while guests arrived in canoes and dugouts bearing gifts and food. Mr. Williams seemed not to notice the extraordinary differences in hair and dress and tattoos that marked one tribe from another, not to hear the astonishing flow of many languages and the shouts of greeting. Sadagawade, the chief himself, had been coaxed by the French to discuss the problem of Ayangat. The chief, however, did not believe in discussion. Sadagawade said the last time Mr. Williams came he had made Monadnock cry. Therefore, he might make Ayangat cry. Therefore, he must go back where he'd come from. Mercy cried because she was glad to see me, said Mr. Williams, but Indians did not cry for such a reason. Ayangat is safe and happy, Mercy wanted to say, but Mr. Williams did not want to hear that. Children should be safe and happy only with their own parents. Eunice is doing all too well, Mr. Williams, Ruth said grimly. She is sliding so fast into being a savage you would not recognize her. Mr. Williams failed to be grateful for Ruth's information. Ruth alone among the captives had fought wearing Indian clothing. When they had reached Kahnawake last spring, her wool skirt and blouse had been shredded and stained, but she would not exchange them for deerskin. As always, Ruth had triumphed. Her Indian family had gone into Montreal and brought her French clothing, so while Mercy wore deerskin, Ruth had flounces and ruffles, a yellow silk cape, and a mauve bonnet to keep off the sun. They won't let you see her, she said Ruth flatly. Now tell us, Mr. Williams, why has Ransom not come? Do people have short memories or no memory? Why do they not rescue us? I get so angry sometimes. Sometimes, thought Mercy. Our sins provoke God to do dreadful things, said the minister sadly. Does he mean that Ransom will not come because we are still sinners, thought Mercy? She knew she sinned. She participated in Mass. She laughed with her Indian family. Was she, Mercy Carter, preventing Ransom? They were jostled by shrieking Indian children vaulting out of a dugout and racing into the village to see what there was to eat. You know what else they're celebrating today? Ruth said to Mr. Williams, along with giving out a savage name to a little girl. The Indians attacked an English village in Maine. They caught the settlers unaware, just like us. Took scalps. They'll be showing them off. Mercy's heart sank. She had not known this. At least, it couldn't have been Tana Horns, she thought, or Thorok Lonergan. Our men hadn't gone anywhere. She caught her thoughts. Our men? No, she corrected herself. Our men are the white settlers. Please stop here and answer question 1. My children, Mr. Williams told them when he was forced to leave without seeing Ayangat, do not surrender. Think constantly of home. Our task is to get home, not make this home. He was looking at Mercy and seemed even sadder. Hundreds danced after the feast, arranging themselves in long lines, endlessly repeating the same steps. The foot patterns were simple. Left, left, right, right, left, right, toe, toe, heel, heel, toe, heel. The rhythm poured down Mercy's bones and shook through her feet. How she loved the drums and the rattles and clappers. Mercy ached to dance, but she kept herself still. Think of home, Mercy reminded herself. Puritans do not dance. Dancing is a sin. Do not surrender. Snowwalker was dancing more on one side of the line than on the other. Her face turned far more often to her left than to her right. Mercy studied the line. A dozen dancers to Snowwalker's left was a young warrior named Geryon Nat Segoa, Great Angry Cloud. It was an honorable name whose history Mercy did not know, but he certainly did not look angry now. He was as captured by Snowwalker as Evan had been by Sarah. Snowwalker danced out of line and over to Mercy. It's all right to dance, Monadnock. Anyway, Fire Eater went back to her house. No one will tell on you. Come, dance with me. Snowwalker's face was bright with vermilion borrowed from her father's war paint, and her arms were decorated with circling rows of tiny dots like 100 bracelets. Her black hair was woven spectacularly with bear claws. She wore a new tunic painted with leaping red stags. She was beautiful. Mercy danced. How wonderful it was! Her feet shouted to the ground, and every beat of the percussion seemed meant just for Mercy. Snowwalker whispered, "Is he looking at me?" She tilted her head toward the young brave. "Yes," said Mercy, "he's looking at you." They stamped and spun. Every half-turn, Mercy and Snowwalker drifted one place closer to Great Angry Cloud. Dancing was a sin, and she knew it, but the dark fear that used to descend over Mercy when she offended the Lord did not come. The Lord was not ignoring her dance. It was more that he saw no offense to worry him. Please stop here and answer question 2. Mercy's second trip to Montreal was on a raw and chilly day when the wind off the river bit her skin and hurt her eyes. Nestena had lost all her metal fish hooks in the course of the fishing season and wanted to replace them. It was a large party that went shopping. Snowwalker, Joanna, Mercy, Eunice Williams, and all their mothers. Mercy was a little surprised that Eunice was going. Mr. Williams was known to be in Montreal. He had been purchased by the French, who let him come and go as he pleased within the city. But Ruth was correct. Eunice had slid so completely into being a savage that Mr. Williams would not in fact recognize her. She was just another small Indian. She really was Ayangat. The mothers loved shopping. Wrapped in blankets and cloaks, they fingered every strange object, exclaiming over it, rejecting it, laughing at it, or negotiating for it. Joanna, Eunice, and Snowwalker were equally eager to go into every shop and inspect the goods of every vendor. But Mercy scanned the crowds. Running into Eben and Sarah had been like being reborn. There were so many captives she had never seen again, so much news she yearned for. Perhaps a little boy would dart from the crowds and she would recognize Daniel. And one beautiful day, surely she would see her brothers Benny and Sam among the Indians and John among the French. And so while the others were admiring themselves in looking glasses to see what color wool they liked best, Mercy studied the passers-by. Many buildings had high stone steps, and Mercy climbed up to get a better view. The person she recognized, however, was Eliza, the widow of Andrew, walking between two nuns. French syllables spilled among them. Eliza, safe and happy, talking easily. Mercy leaned out toward Eliza as, a lifetime ago, she had leaned out of her bedroom window toward the hills of Deerfield and seen the taking of Zeb and John. And just as she had said nothing that time, she said nothing now. Why remind Eliza of Deerfield and the terrible death of Andrew? Please stop here and answer question 3. Mercy dropped her eyes so Eliza would not see her before she remembered that the golden hair that usually gave her away was covered by a fur cap. She, too, was merely another Indian. There was not a risk that the nuns or Eliza would even think of examining her. Nestena bought everyone a hot French pastry from the one street cart and sweet hot tea from another, while Ayangat's mother tried to come to a decision on wool colors. Mercy slipped away, threading through the crowds to the center of the square, and stopped short. Not 10 feet away, Mr. Williams was arguing with a Jesuit priest. They looked almost identical, their arms flailing, deep frowns marring their faces. Mercy was back among the Indians in a moment, whispering to Ayangat's mother, "Ayangat's white father is coming this way. See him with the priest?" Ayangat's mother set the woolens down without buying anything. "Come, daughters," she said calmly. "We go back to the wharf." "Oh, let's stay longer," pleaded Ayangat. "I wanted the yellow cloth, and I thought we were going to church to hear the trumpet. You told me all about the trumpet." "Another day," said her mother, taking her hand. They did not hurry, and the high, disappointed voice of Ayangat continued. But Mr. Williams would not recognize the voice, because Ayangat spoke in Mohawk, and he would remember only Eunice speaking in English. At the wharf, all 3 ocean-going vessels were now loading fur for the return voyage to France. There was great wealth here. Beaver skins were distinctive, flat ovals of soft, shining brown. Their bales were smaller than bales of other skins, but all hides stank, and the smell of the ships was intense. The Atlantic was dangerous to cross in winter. The longer they waited, the greater the risk. They must set sail soon. Nestena piled furs on the bottom of the dugout's steep well and told Joanna, Ayangat, and Mercy to take naps. Ayangat was grumpy, but obeyed after a sharp look, curling at her mother's feet and vanishing from sight. Joanna and Mercy tucked themselves at the other end while the mothers and Snowwalker sat up patiently to wait for the men. The women seemed happily entertained by the ships. Nobody asked Ayangat's mother why it had been necessary to leave so quickly. Joanna breathed in Mercy's ear. "Why did you do that? It was mean and wrong. You know her father would give anything to see Eunice." "How did you know Mr. Williams was there?" Mercy whispered back. "You can't see that far." "I heard you tell on him. Mercy, that was her father. Eunice loves him. She needs to see him, just as we need to see our fathers." Mercy buried her face in the mink blanket. She had committed a terrible sin. She had been a dutiful daughter to the wrong set of parents. Please stop here and answer question 4. Mercy had let herself believe that Eunice was Eongot, and her father was Colt's son, not Mr. Williams. She had let herself believe that Nstenna and Tonahorns were... In one terrible cold moment, Mercy Carter understood what the name Tonahorns meant. It meant, he splits the door. She muffled her scream of rage and comprehension against the mink. At some point in his warrior life, Tonahorns had taken a hatchet to a wooden door and broken through. It must have been a great event, presumably with many scalps to deserve a new name in its honor. The scalps could have been Iroquois, but Iroquois doors, like Kahnawake doors, were curtains of skin. It did not take a hatchet to break an Indian door. So every time Mercy said his name, she honored the moment that her master had smashed through an English settler's door, and into his house, and into his head. Please stop here and answer question 5. The waters lapped, the cold wind blew, the bales were hoisted into holds, and the sun lowered. At last Tonahorns and the others returned. Mercy feigned sleep, and the adults maneuvered around her. She could not look at Tonahorns. She could not look at herself, not just becoming Indian, but betraying the English. The boats crossed the water under a sky black and moonless and strewn with stars. Nstenna entertained the girls by naming the star families living in the sky. The Indian syllables tumbled and fell, and having understood Tonahorns at last, now Mercy understood Monadnock, a lone star. She flopped on her back on the mink rug and stared straight up. Many stars in that black sky also lay alone, far from their brothers and sisters, not part of a family. Please stop here and answer question 6. Lord, no, cried Mercy in her heart. That's a terrible name, a cruel and mean name. Lord, save me from being a girl named Alone. Forgive my sins, especially against Mr. Williams and Eunice. Send a ransom, Lord. They reached the jetty at Kahnawake and piled out of the boat, gathering the many purchases. The town glowed and smoked with fires of welcome. If Mercy turned Indian before ransom came in some dark wilderness way, she would never climb out of this prison, and it would be, as Ruth had predicted, her own doing. Mercy lagged behind, unwilling to enter the long house she had actually been calling home. Tonahorns rarely paid attention to Mercy, because capturing prisoners was men's work, but raising them was women's. But now he turned back. Daughter? Daughter. Never. He was no father. Indian men didn't do that. He was exactly what Ruth and Mr. Williams said, a killer, a thief of babies and children, a savage. He dared call her daughter, this man who had given her the name Alone. She walked around Tonahorns without speaking, an act of great rudeness that she found satisfying, and went into the house where he did not live, and which he infrequently visited. Ruth was right about that, too. Nstenna and Tonahorns were not really married, because married people live together and share a hearth. Please stop here and answer question 7. In the smoky half-dark, Mercy thought, why wait for ransom, which shows no sign of arriving? Why not escape? She flung out of her mind the cherished word ransom. Escape was a richer, finer word. For ransom, the captive must wait. They might wait 30 years, like that white grandmother. But escape, she considered it seriously. On the second day of the march, the Indians had threatened their captives with being burned alive should there be another escape. But Father Muriel said that kind of thing didn't happen anymore. It was an empty threat. In any case, months had gone by. It was long past the time when such a punishment might occur. The only person at risk was Mercy herself. Please stop here and answer question 8. There was no way she could retrace the 300 miles they had followed to get here. Like the ships, she must leave by the only road that existed in Canada, the St. Lawrence River. Those ships, being loaded with beaver, were probably leaving tomorrow or the next day for France. She would get passage. She did not know how yet, but it had been done once. Several years ago, a Deerfield boy named John Gillett had been captured and made a slave to the Indians here. He hadn't been adopted, just used for rough work. He had fled, boarded a ship bound for France, and once there escaped the French too. He had made his way to London, coaxed a church to pay his passage across the ocean to Boston, and from Boston, John Gillett walked home to Deerfield. When he married, though, he wisely moved his bride south to the Connecticut farm. No Gillett would be caught in another Indian attack. Only Carter's, thought Mercy grimly. Such an escape would be harder for a girl. She must find a protector. Perhaps a priest returning to his French cathedral, a French wife returning to visit her mother in Paris, a kind fatherly sea captain. It won't be hard to leave Kanawake, she thought. They trust me, especially after today, warning them about Mr. Williams. Mercy decided to act immediately, before she thought about it too long and the attempt seemed too frightening. Please stop here and answer question 9. Miss Stenna was stirring the stew that had been simmering since the shopping party left in the morning. May I go back to Montreal by myself tomorrow? Mercy asked. I have my 2 baskets of sassafras to sell. I didn't see anybody else in the market with sassafras. I want to buy presents for everybody. Buying gifts for one another was always smiled upon, and the French loved sassafras, believing that it cured anything. Yes, Monadnock, you may, said Miss Stenna. As easy as that, Mercy marveled. Tomorrow she would escape. It would be another unknown, but it would be in the direction of freedom. Mercy Carter was going home. In the morning, of course, there was Mass. Mercy was able to look at Father Muriel and see that Mr. Williams was correct. In his swishing black robes, the priest skulked around, trying to grab the souls of the children whose bodies had already been grabbed by Indians. You've almost had me, she thought. After Mass, the Indian men took advantage of the soft earth to dig out corn barns. These were pits the size of mass graves to be lined with sheets of birch bark, into which hundreds of baskets of dried corn kernels would be poured. Covered with pine straw, then another layer of birch bark, and mounded with dirt, the corn would stay dry and sweet all winter. Everything here was corn. Boiled, roasted, baked, dried, ground, combined with squash or kidney beans, with meat, with syrup. Mercy turned her back on Tana Horns as he dug out a corn barn. I will never see you again, she thought. In the longhouse, Miss Stenna's stew pot had kidney beans, chunk of venison, and, of course, corn. While everybody else went out to shell more corn, Mercy ate heavily to prepare for her escape. She would need money. Sassafras was a good excuse to go into Montreal, but it could not buy her passage. She could hardly carry off the beaver skins stacked and waiting for Tana Horns to sell in Albany, but lying beneath Miss Stenna's platform was her jewelry box. Tana Horns was a very successful hunter and trapper, and his wife had fine adornments. Miss Stenna's cross was almost as magnificent as Father Muriel's. Studded with real gems, it had been brought one year when Tana Horns came upon a great many beaver furs. Now Mercy wondered exactly how a person came upon beaver furs. Did a person slaughter the trapper? He splits the door, she thought, raging all over again. Mercy pulled out the jewelry box and stared down at the splendid cross. Miss Stenna never wore it in the fields lest a train break. In the firelight, the facets of the jewels glowed like embers. I can't steal that, she thought. Certainly not from Miss Stenna. She never hurt me. I cannot pile that sin on top of my other sins. Ruth would say, they stole your life, your family, your home. Of course you can take their stupid Catholic cross. It was possible to enter a longhouse in silence, because no wooden floors creaked, no wooden floorboard groaned, no heavy shoe tromped. Mercy was unprepared to find Miss Stenna at her side. Shame made it impossible to look Miss Stenna in the eyes. Yes, daughter, said Miss Stenna, wear my best cross. This is your first time alone in the city. You must look beautiful. We will be proud. Miss Stenna put the chain over Mercy's head and also slid 6 silver bracelets up her arm. They were fat bracelets, so that her arm was solid, with silver from wrist to elbow. Money, thought Mercy. I have plenty of money now. Come, Monadnock, said Miss Stenna. Spookumenen's father awaits. Ruth was going into Montreal? Mercy froze. She could not imagine taking Ruth with her. Ruth had never cooperated with anything in her life. Ruth would find 1,000 things wrong, even with this plan. Miss Stenna smiled. No, Spookmenen stays here. Even she must help with the corn. Her uncles, though, have arrived in Montreal with many furs. Her father, Otter, goes to get them and will take you. You will ride home sitting on top of much beaver. Miss Stenna kept fixing Mercy's hair, although it was perfect. Snowwalker had fussed with it before Mass. Much depends on you, daughter. Mercy said nothing to that, and Miss Stenna did not elaborate. Together they walked out of the longhouse, out of Kanawake village, and down the steps of the stone jetty. She had not had to steal the cross. It had been given to her. Please stop here and answer question 10. Chapter 11. Montreal, November 1704. Temperature 34 degrees. It was cold on the water. Otter did not paddle smoothly, and ice spray hit Mercy's face and arms. She was not wearing the clothing she would have chosen. To go with the glittering cross, Nestena had insisted upon her best tunic and her finest fur hat. Into her hair Nestena had woven shells and bear claws, hardly the garb of an English girl seeking a cabin on a French ship. Around them were another 2 canoes from Kahnawake, men bringing wives and sisters and mothers. Mercy managed to chat about shopping at the same time she stared down the river, holding her breath, praying the ships had not yet sailed. Finally, she could make out their masts. Her plan was still possible. Otter tied up at one of the small jetties, and the men left to do their trading. Mercy knew by now that they were all smugglers. They claimed loyalty to the French and were always willing to help the French fight the English, but in the end, furs were sold to whatever buyer paid the most. It happened to be the Dutch in Albany. However, since the Dutch promptly sold those furs to England, it was forbidden to sell to the Dutch. No Mohawk paid the slightest attention to the law. The Indian women began shopping and exchanging news. There were Norwalk and Oneida and Kawasuk Indians to talk to. There were French fur traders and jewelers and a display of glass. Mercy traded her sassafras for a long gray wool cape with a hood. It would wholly cover her Indian clothing. The women protested vigorously. It was dull. It was ugly. Monadnock had a better cape at home. Why not purchase this pink scarf, embroidered in a riot of green leaves and white flowers? Slowly the women separated, one going to the ironmonger, one to the shoemaker to sell him leather, one to the tattoo artist to buy needles. Mercy turned down the lane with no shops, which led past the enclosed gardens of the convent. In the shadow of the nun's world, Mercy pulled her hair out of its braids and flung down the Indian junk tangled in it, shells and claws. She saw herself, as Ruth did, as Cousin Mary had, a pathetic little English girl trying to curry favor with savages. Using her fingers to comb her hair, Mercy put on the long gray cloak, and this time she did not cover her hair. Its gold sheen and her blue eyes were her proof that she was English. Then she walked back to the wharf. Please stop here and answer question 11. She had lost her fear of small boats. After all, Indians handled canoes well and rarely went out in bad weather, and Mercy could now swim. But how alien were these great vessels with their rope ladders and furled sails, stinking tar, and shouting sailors? Their wooden bodies creaked like 100 doors. They pulled the floating dock up and down so that everybody standing on it also bobbed and swayed. She had heard that sailors slept in hammocks like Indian babies. Would they give her a cabin? Would she have a tiny room with a tiny bed and a tiny window? Or would she too have a sling hanging from the ceiling? No matter how much beaver they had on board, no matter what profit they expected from it, surely they would want this jeweled cross as well. They could pry the gems out and set them into necklaces and earrings for their wives or sweethearts. Mercy steered clear the French voyageurs who had brought the fur bales to Montreal. They were Indian lovers and might hold her until Otter came back. It was easy to recognize a voyager. They thought nothing of paddling 16 hours a day, 5 miles an hour. Their arms were as big as other men's thighs. She was the only girl anywhere, and the only child. A dozen filthy, swearing French sailors wrestled with barrels of water that they would need for the voyage. Great tangles and whirls of rope lay everywhere. Unsold fish rotted in abandoned baskets. She had practiced French in her mind, but now she lost the words. She could not even remember the right English words. She possessed only Mohawk. If Otter or the other men saw her here, what would they do? If the captain did not have space for her, how would she coax him to fit her in anyway? Who was the captain? What if the captain had just laughed and sent for Otter? The dock lurched and Mercy staggered a little. One of the sailors left the others and sauntered over to her. He was tall and thick-waisted, with a matted beard and a well-chewed pipe. "Excuse me," she said, trying to pronounce it in the French way. "Excusez-moi." She tried to smile, and he grinned back. The rotting stumps of his remaining teeth stuck up like pegs next to his grayish tongue. He answered her, however, in French accented English. "Girl, English, eh? What is your name? Indian stole you, eh? Tell me. I'll send news to your people." His excellent speech meant that he did a lot of trading with the English. It meant, Mercy prayed, that he liked the English. She found her tongue. "Will you take me to France, sir, or anywhere at all? Wherever you're going, I can pay." He raised his eyebrows. You do not belong to an Indian? She flushed and knew her red cheeks gave her their own answer. But rather than speaking, she held out the cross. The sun was bright and the gemstones even brighter. The man sucked in his breath. He leaned very close to her to examine the cross. Yes, he said, it is worth much. He straightened up slowly, his eyes traveling from her waist to her breast, to her throat, to her hair. The other sailors also straightened, and they too left their work drawn by the glittering cross. So, you want to sail with me, girl? He stroked her cheek. His nails were yellow and thick like shingles and filthy underneath. He twined her hair into a hank, circling it tighter and tighter as if to scalp. You are the jewel, he said. Come, I get a comb and fix this hair. The other sailors slouched over. They pressed against her, and she could not retreat. He continued to hold her by the hair, as if she were a rabbit to be skinned. She could see neither river nor sky, only the fierce grins of sailor leaning down. Bien, said the Frenchman, returning to his own tongue. This little girl begs to sail with us, he told his men. What do you say, boys? He began laughing. Where should she sleep? What am I bid? Please stop here and answer question 12. She did not have enough French to get every word, but it was the same in any language. The soldiers laughed raucously. Indians had strong taboos about women. Men would not be with their women if they were going hunting or having important meetings, and certainly when not going off to war. She had never heard of an Indian man forcing himself on a woman, but these were not Indians. She let the cross fall on its chain and pushed the Frenchman away, but he caught both her wrists easily in his free hand and stretched her out by the wrists as well as by the hair. Please stop here and answer question 13. Tom Horns pricked the white man's hand with the tip of his scalping knife. White men loading barrels stood still. White sailors on deck ceased to move. White passers-by froze where they walked. The bearded Frenchman drew back, holding his hand up in surrender. A little blood ran down his arm. Of course, he said, nodding. She's yours, I see. The sailors edged away. Behind them now, Mercy could see 2 pirogues of Indians drifting by the floating dock. They looked like Sauk from the west. They were standing up in the deep wells of their sturdy boats, shifting their weapons to catch the sun. Ton of Horns did not look at Mercy. The tip of his knife advanced, and the Frenchman backed away from it. He was a very strong man, possibly stronger than Ton of Horns, but behind Ton of Horns were 20 heavily armed braves. The Frenchman kept backing, and Ton of Horn kept pressing. No sailor dare moved a muscle, not outnumbered as they were. The Sauk let out a hideous wailing war cry. Mercy shuddered with the memory of other war cries. Even more terrified, all the French took another step back, and 3 of them fell into the St. Lawrence River. The Sauk burst into wild laughter. The voyageurs hooted and booed. The sailors threw ropes to their floundering comrades because only Indians knew how to swim. Ton of Horns took Mercy's hand and led her to one of the pirogues, and the Sauk paddled close, hanging on to the edge of the dock so that Mercy could climb in. Mercy could not look at the Sauk. She had shamed Ton of Horns in front of them. Mercy climbed in, and Ton of Horns stepped in after her, and the men paddled slowly upstream to Ton of Horns' canoe. The other pirogues stayed at the wharf, where those Sauk continued to stand, their weapons shining. Eventually, the French began to load the ship again. Daughter, said Ton of Horns, the sailors are not good men. She nodded. He bent until he could look directly in her eyes, something Indians do not care for as a rule. Daughter. She flushed scarlet. On her white cheeks, guilt would always be revealed. The cross protects, said Ton of Horns, or so the French father claims. Perhaps it does, but better protection is to stay out of danger. Did Ton of Horns think that she had gotten lost? Did he believe that she had ended up on the wharf by accident, or that she was waving the cross around for protection? Or was he in the way of Indians, allowing that to be the circumstance, because it was easier? When he had thanked the Sauk sufficiently, and they had agreed to tell Otter that Mercy had gone home with her father, Ton of Horns paddled back to Kahnawake. His long, strong arms bent into the current. Her family had not trusted her after all. Ton of Horns must have been following her. Or, in the way of a real father, he had not trusted Montreal. Either way, she was defeated. There was no escape. If there is no escape, and if there is also no ransom, what is there for me? Thought Mercy. I don't want to be alone. A single star in a black and terrible night? How can I endure the name a lone star? Why do you call me Monadnock? She asked. She wanted desperately to go home and end this ugly day. Home. It was still a word of warmth and comfort, still a word of safety and love. The homes she had known misted and blended, and she did not really know if it was Nstenna in the long house, or stepmama in Deerfield, or her mother in heaven, whose home she wanted. You are brave, daughter, said Tana Horns without looking at her, without breaking his rhythm, and can stand alone. You shine with courage, and so shone every night of your march. You are a hope for sons and daughters to come. On you much depends. Please stop here and answer question 14. In the remaining weeks of autumn, they roasted chestnuts and gathered beechnuts, walnuts, and butternuts. The girls shelled corn and dried apples and cranberries. The boys shot pigeons and doves by the score, and geese migrating and ducks. Bonfires never went out, and meat was constantly smoking. Nstenna wove a basket of intricate design. She chose slender branches of willow from which she had painstakingly scraped the thin yellow bark. Some she had soaked in butternut dye, and now, alternating wide and narrow bands, golden brown, she created complex patterns of light and dark. Then she sat Mercy in front of her, circling Mercy with her arms, and with her fingers ordered the movement of Mercy's. It was exactly how her real mother had taught her to knit. Mercy closed her eyes and leaned back against Nstenna. What warmth and comfort there was within a mother's arms. Mercy began to weep. Mother, she prayed to her mother in heaven, please forgive me. She blinked back tears, and only one splattered on the reeds in front of her. Together but separately, she and Nstenna finished the basket. It was a work of art. What is the occasion? Asked Mercy shakily. This basket had taken far too much time and care to be used for corn or laundry. Snowwalker will soon have a husband of her own, said Nstenna. She must have fine gifts. Mercy was delighted. Great angry cloud? She guessed happily. Of course. The families are pleased. It is good. Father Muriel will say the vows and write the names in his book. Not the real names, though. Father Muriel would call Snowwalker by her French name, Jeanne. But what anybody's real name was, Mercy no longer knew. You, Monadnock, are a hope for sons and daughters. Mercy's head spun. She made one last effort to push away the world of Kahnawake. Nstenna, on that day when I went into Montreal... Hush, said her mother. We speak only of joyful things. Next I will show you how to etch a drawing on the birch bark box you will make for Snowwalker. She knows, thought Mercy. But in her world, you do not confess sins. You set them down. Please stop here and answer question 15. We're going hunting, Joseph told Mercy at the end of the month. Deer are gathering because it is rutting season. They'll be in the oak forests, eating acorns on the ground, so they'll be easy to find. Our family always goes north between Matawan River and the Black. Our family, said Ruth, but she did not say it loudly or with heat. They could see by the blackened vines how quickly winter was approaching. They could feel it in the morning, tasting sharp frost in the air. Ruth, too, wanted enough food to last the winter. Some warriors would be gone for the entire winter. Others would return in shifts bringing meat, bear, moose, deer, beaver, raccoon, fox. Some for food, all for fur. But the party searching for bear came back more quickly than they meant to. It was the work of a warrior to enter the cave, jab the bear awake, and tempt him, grumpy and superous, to come out where he would be shot. No fur was so warm, no meat so good, no claws better ornaments. Of course, one swipe of that gray paw could break a man's jaw or rip off an arm. But that was why it was so admired and why the warriors who goaded the bear got the claws. Such impressive risk. Altogether, the hunting party lost 3 men in poor judgment of bears. The paw that swiped Tana Horns in the face was given to his widow. His funeral was in church and in Latin. How soft the mass was. How hard and fierce Tana Horns had been. Please stop here and answer question 16. Mercy was not comforted. Tana Horns was just dead, and the mass was just noise. She was relieved when the Indians left the church and walked to the place of the dead, where the powwow led another ceremony and they could all howl and beat their breasts. On me much depends. Oh, Lord, does that mean that I take care of Miss Denna now? That one day my son will be named Tana Horns? Miss Denna and Tana Horns' mother and sisters blackened their faces with soot and chopped their hair off raw and ugly to lose their looks and grace. Miss Denna would not let Mercy cut her hair, but she agreed to blacken Mercy's face in the color of sorrow. The mourners prepared for several hours, but when Mercy went to join them, Ruth screamed, "How can you grieve for that murderer, Mercy? Remember his barbaric cruelties." So had Uncle Nathaniel said, "You must remember." So had Mr. Williams said, "You must remember." And one of the people Mercy would always remember was Tana Horns. "He saved me, Ruth," she said sadly. "I owed him." Ruth hauled Mercy down to the river. She threw the young girl into the water and waded in right after her. The first crust of ice had formed and it splintered around their legs. Mercy would have fought back, but fighting was unthinkable because Ruth was right. A bear had avenged the Carter family while Mercy had not. Ruth scrubbed Mercy with sand as if adopting her, as if washing away bad white blood. When Mercy's face was clean of soot and Ruth's rage spent, the girls climbed out of the water. In Kahnawake, everything was in the open. There was no cover, no place to hide. Soaked and shivering in the wind, she walked alone to her longhouse. Miss Denna left the mourners and came after her to wrap Mercy in blankets. "Do you truly mourn your father?" asked Miss Denna. How awful Miss Denna looked, her face black and dripping, her hair jagged and torn, her clothing rent, her hands grimy from touching her sooty face. Mercy nodded. She mourned all the fathers, English and Indian. She could not count as high as the number of fathers there were. "Then I will give you just a little paint, one stroke on each cheek, to show how your heart hurts." Please stop here and answer question 17. Mercy raised her face to accept the paint. "What about Ruth?" "Do not worry," said Miss Denna. What capacity the Indians had not to worry. In Deerfield, all had been worry. Worry about the Lord, worry about sin, worry about today, worry about tomorrow, worry about crops, worry about children. But Indians set worry down. The next day, Mercy didn't see Ruth once, nor the day after that, nor the third day. Finally, she thought at Otter. "Is Bukumenin ill?" said Mercy anxiously. "She has been sold," said Otter. "She is in Montreal with the French nuns." Mercy was astonished. He had sold Ruth? This man who had accepted everything Ruth had ever done, from throwing packs to kicking him in the shins, from wearing French clothing to refusing to speak a syllable of Mohawk? "When she could not let you mourn your father, it was best for her to go," said Otter. Mercy wanted to sob. Difficult as Ruth was, Mercy would miss her terribly. She was Mercy's only enduring link to Deerfield. Please stop here and answer question 18 and 19. "Would you tell me why you gave her a second name, Otter? Let the sky in?" "She never told you? I am not surprised. She looked two ways on this. Once on the march, she and I stood at the edge of an ice cliff, and it was I who lost our argument. I fell over and was much damaged. Ruth risked her life to save me," he said, using the English name Ruth had refused to surrender. "Without her, I would not again have seen the sky. But she was not glad to have done it. It was punishment for her to give me life." Ruth had saved the life of her father's killer? Oh, poor Ruth, carrying her good deed with her, knowing it was equally a bad deed. Otter rested a hand on Mercy's shoulder. "Your Ruth is well. She will not miss us. We will miss her, for she did bring our sky in. Some day in Montreal you will see her again. Now go with the children and play. You have mourned enough." Please stop here and answer question 20.